Kia ora, good morning, or I should say good evening everyone, Rich Wong here, welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to have a look at the third 1.8 full frame lens from Panasonic. It is the 24mm f1.8 lens. I thought we could start this review by come out here and shoot some video outdoor because the wide angle and also the compact size of this lens could make it quite a good lens if you want to shoot some vlogging style video. Previously, I like to use the Panasonic 20-60 lens with the S5 to shoot some vlogging video because the 20mm wide end, I really love it, and also it's also quite a compact size as well. But this 24mm f1.8 lens does have some advantage, which is the large f1.8 aperture, which means not only I can separate myself from the background quite a bit more, but the 1.8 aperture also make it better when you need to shoot under low light condition. Like right now, it's just after sunset, so it's starting to get quite dark. But with this 1.8 lens, I can shoot not only at the lower ISO setting, which improves the image quality, but the autofocus performance should also be quite a bit better compared to a 3.5 or f4 lens. Okay, now we have shot a bit of outdoor footage. Now let's head back to my place and we can talk about the design, build quality and image quality of this 24mm f1.8 lens. Okay, let's start by talk about the design and build quality of this lens first. This Lumix 24 f1.8 is quite a small and lightweight lens. The weight of the lens is just over 300 grams. Compared it with the Lumix 2060, the size of the Lumix 24mm lens is a little bit smaller than the Lumix 2060, even though this difference is not really that significant. And compared it with the 24-105 f4, then yes, the 24mm lens is definitely quite a bit smaller and also quite a bit lighter as well. While this 24mm f1.8 lens may feel a little bit plasticky, it is a weatherproof lens. It is splash, dust and freeze resistant, and yes, it also has a metal lens mount just like all the other Lumix S lenses. The design of this lens is pretty much the same as the other Lumix S series f1.8 lenses. In fact, the size is identical. It also takes the 67mm front filter, just like the other f1.8 lenses. What it means is it allows you not only to share the filter between all these different f1.8 lenses, and also if you mount your camera on a gimbal or in the rig, you can just swap the lens without having to readjust anything or rebalance your gimbal. When you're taking photos, the autofocus speed of this lens is really fast. Pretty much you point it and then you half click the shutter and it will focus almost instantly. The autofocus is also extremely quiet. Even if I move the lens next to my ear and I try to do autofocus, I hear almost no autofocus noise at all. So there really isn't much I can complain about the autofocus when I'm taking photos. But how about when you are filming video? I will talk about that in the video filming session a little bit later on in this video. The minimum focus distance of this lens is 24 cm or about 0.8 feet, and that will give you the maximum magnification of 0.15 times. So it is not bad at all for a 24mm full frame lens. And when you are taking close-up photos, the sharpness also appears to be pretty decent even when you are shooting at the maximum aperture. Okay, now let's talk about the image quality. Since a lot of you guys would probably have one of the Panasonic Lumix zoom lens, either the 2060 or the 24-105 f4 lens, and it does overlap with this 24mm lens in terms of focal length. So I will do a bit of image quality comparison with these two zoom lenses as well and see if there's any reason to get this 24mm lens if you already have one of those two zoom lenses. At the maximum aperture f1.8, the center sharpness of this Lumix 24mm lens is good but not excellent. Stop down to f2.8, then the center sharpness become very good, and if you stop down further, it will only improve the center sharpness very marginally. And now let's have a look at the corner. At the maximum aperture, the corner sharpness of the Lumix 24mm lens is really not the sharpest. And just like the center, stop down to f2.8 will improve the corner sharpness quite a bit, and then stop down further would only make marginal improvement. So overall, f1.8 with this Lumix lens is definitely very usable, but stop down to f2.8, then it is a really sharp lens. Now let's compare it with the two Lumix zoom lenses. The 24-105 f4 lens is a constant f4 lens, while the 2060 at 24mm, the maximum aperture is f3.8, which is really close to f4. So I'll just compare them all at f4 aperture. At f4, the center sharpness is very similar with all these three lenses. They're all really sharp, so virtually there is no difference between these three lenses at the center. And if we look at the corner, the 24 f1.8 and the 24-105 are both very sharp at f4, while the 2060 lens is slightly soft at f4. While the bokeh from a 24mm lens may not be as important as a longer focal length lens, but because of its f1.8 maximum aperture, you can still dissolve the background quite a bit. For example, right now I'm actually filming with the Lumix 24-1.8 lens at f1.8, and if you look at the background behind me, it already dissolved quite a bit, even though it is only just about 1 meter or so behind me. The bokeh from this Lumix 24mm lens looks quite nice to me. It's not really nervous at all, and the transition also looks very smooth. And even when I stop down the lens to around f5.6, the bokeh balls still remain very round and nice thanks to its 9 curved aperture braid. At f1.8, vignetting is easy to see in this test photo. Stop down to f2.8, it becomes much improved. And at f4, the only very corner you can see a little bit of vignetting. Compare it with the 2060 and the 24-105 lenses at f4. The 24 f1.8 lens has the least amount of vignetting, which is not really surprising because it is a f1.8 lens. But the 2060 is actually really good, as it only has slightly more vignetting than the 24mm f1.8 lens. The 24-105 has some pretty strong vignetting at the corner. Chromatic aberration control is very good with this lens. I see really minimal amount of color fringing in all my photos. Even some of the most challenging test photos with very high contrast, there is still very small amount of chromatic aberration. However, my local test photo does show there is a bit of longitude chromatic aberration. While it is not terrible, I can see that even before I zoom in the photo. Checking my distortion test photo, which I shot in RAW file format, is quite interesting. I said that because the result really depends on if you enable the lens profile correction or not. If I disable the distortion correction, then there is quite a bit of distortion. It's definitely very noticeable, as you can see in this test photo. But if I enable the lens profile correction, then distortion is virtually all gone. So if you are shooting something that no distortion is important and you are shooting in RAW, definitely enable the lens profile correction during post-processing. Compare this Lumix 24mm lens with the two Lumix zoom lenses. Here are the RAW photos that I shot with all these three lenses at 24mm. And once again, I import these files into Lightroom and I turn off the lens profile correction. Surprisingly, it is the Lumix 20-60 zoom lens that has the least amount of distortion. The 24-1.8 lens and the 24-105 f4 lens both have very similar amount of distortion, even though the pattern looks slightly different. Recently, I have been testing a lot of lenses. Over the last 4 months or so, I think I have tested over 25 different lenses. Usually, there's one thing that separates the lenses from the smaller and newer third-party manufacturer and the more established manufacturer like Panasonic, and it is the lens flare performance. Lenses from the more established company usually have much better lens flare performance, and this 24mm lens is a perfect example. This Lumix 24 1.8 lens has really good lens flare performance. Most of the time, there is virtually no lens flare at all, even if I'm shooting directly into the sun or a bright light source at night. And sometimes even when I see a bit of lens flare, usually it is at a very minimal level. Contrast and color also remains really good when I'm shooting directly into a bright light source. Starting from around f8, you can see Sunstars in your photos. The 9 aperture ray design render 18 points Sunstars. At the minimum aperture f16, the Sunstars are sharp and looks quite nice to me. Compare the Sunstars from the 24mm lens with the 2 Lumix zoom lenses. All these test photos were shot at the minimum aperture, which means it is f22 for the 2 zoom lenses while the 24mm lens is only f16. But the Sunstars, actually they all look very similar, so there's pretty much no difference between all these 3 lenses when it comes to Sunstars. Shooting the night sky at f1.8, I could see a bit of Coma at the corner of the frame. Stopping down the lens to f2.8 could reduce the amount of Coma, but does not completely get rid of it. When tested with the Lumix S5 running the firmware 2.0, continuous autofocus when filming at 4K 25 at f1.8 using face tracking seems to be good. If I move quickly, it will need about half a second to a second to catch up, but it does it reliably and also very smoothly. Now, one thing you do not know is the last 4 videos here on my YouTube channel and also this current one, they are all shot using this Lumix 24mm lens. I shot them all at f1.8 and just using face detection. And the autofocus works really well as well. Yes, I know it is a talking head video, so it may not be really challenging when it comes to autofocus speed. But in terms of reliability, like not suddenly lost the focus or pausing or lack of pausing, the lens with the Lumix S5 together works really well. I have virtually no pausing, and in the 6 hours plus footage that I've shot so far using this lens, so far the autofocus has not even once drifted away. I've also used this lens to shoot a bit of outdoor vlogging video. When I'm shooting at f1.8, occasionally the autofocus may drift slightly, but it wouldn't drift too far away, and within a second or so it would recover itself. So overall, I would not say the autofocus performance is perfect when you are filming video, but it's really good enough. And in terms of focus breathing, this lens has really small amount of focus breathing. Check out the focus breathing when I move away from the camera. The focus shift from around 0.5 meter to about 10-15 meter or so. The amount of focus breathing is really minor. And just like the other Lumix S lenses, this lens also supports both linear and non-linear manual focus. So filmmaker, especially those using follow focus, you will love the linear focus mode. You can also set the focus ring rotation angle from the camera's setup screen, which as far as I know, Panasonic is the only brand that allows you to do that. Panasonic has announced 4 f1.8 lenses last year, and this 24mm f1.8 lens is the 3rd one. The last remaining one is the 35mm f1.8 that should be coming out very soon. The 4 focal length 24, 35, 50, 85. This 24mm lens is the one that I'm least interested in because I love 35mm. I also love 50mm focal length. And 85mm is great for me because I'm a wedding and portrait photographer. So 24mm is not really as interesting to me compared to the other 3 lenses. But guess what? This is actually the first f1.8 lens that I'm going to pre-order one for myself after testing it. It's not because it is a perfect lens, Now don't get me wrong, it is a very good lens, but it is not perfect as there are few areas, for example the distortion or the Bokeh, that is not perfect. But overall I think it is still a very good lens, and I just really love the compact size of this lens, and when I mount it on the S5, they just match perfectly in a lot of ways. I find it is actually a very versatile focal length as well. I can use it for my YouTube video, as I've been using it for a month or so, and for vlogging as well, and I certainly am going to use it to shoot quite a bit of landscape photo as well. And compare it with my 2060 kit lens, which I have been using a lot, it gives me 2-stop advantage at 24mm, which could make a huge difference, especially when I'm shooting under low light. I was originally planning to get the 35mm f1.8 lens when it is released, but now since I want to get this 24mm lens, I may probably end up getting this lens and a 50mm f1.8 lens instead. So it's a 2-lens lightweight setup with my S5, which is great for photo as well as video. So what do you guys think about this Lumix 24mm f1.8 lens? And which of the f1.8 lens are you most interested in? Drop a comment below and let me know. I would love to find out which is the most popular f1.8 lens and why is it, and also love to chat with you guys a little bit more.